It is 9:05 here at Sayville High School on April 19th, and we are here for Alex Sullivan's AP Research presentation and oral defense.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to come to my presentation. Today, I will be discussing the impact of LGBTQ+ policies on perceived health. I want you guys to think back on your own lives. Now, imagine your life as a member of the LGBTQ+ community. What if I told you that just because of this change, you were more likely to have cancer, more likely to attempt suicide, more likely to be disabled? Identifying as part of the LGBTQ+ community heightens these risks, even when there should be no relationship between being queer and having worsened health. In order to understand this complex topic, let's take a look at this inverted triangle, narrowing down to my own research, starting at the broadest lens of health conditions. Cisgendered and heterosexual people may be at risk of illnesses due to certain factors like weight, diet, or daily habits that can be changed. LGBTQ+ people have an extra risk tacked onto this likelihood. And this is not something that can just be easily changed or fixed. It's something that you live with. Frederick Goldson and other researchers from the University of Washington presented a study that showcases that people of the LGBTQ+ community are at a higher likelihood of chronic health conditions compared to their cisgendered and heterosexual counterparts. They are prone to the most common, costly, and preventable health issues. Looking at specifics, sexual minority older women are more likely to have arthritis, asthma, or suffer a heart attack or stroke. The men were more likely to have a weakened immune system or even cancer. Furthermore, Frederick Goldson and others found consistent findings of elevated disability among this group. Looking at this infographic here, across every field, members of the LGBTQ+ community have weaker health. In the mental aspect of this, Ann Haas and Andrew Lane from the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention found that LGBTQ+ people were at a significantly higher risk of reporting lifetime suicide attempts compared to cisgendered or heterosexual individuals. Gay and bisexual men specifically were 4 times more likely to report suicide attempts. Furthermore, the issue of mental and physical health is in relation to the LGBTQ+ community is very complex due to the fact that when one goes to the doctor, they are not inquired about their sexual orientation. Therefore, the data coming from these studies all come from self-reports, unlike many other minority groups. Because of this, the LGBTQ+ community has been consistently overlooked in terms of health disparities. Now, to delve deeper into this topic, we must ask the question why. Why is this occurring? Researchers have come up with a multitude of reasons. However, one seems to stick out each time. To understand the cause in this cause-effect relationship, it's important to understand the subject of social epidemiology. Well, what is regular epidemiology? Epidemiology is the branch of medical science that investigates all the factors that determine the presence or absence of diseases and disorders. Social epidemiology, on the other hand, is the branch of epidemiology that focuses particularly on the effects of social structural factors on states of health. In the European Journal of Epidemiology, Michael Marmot analyzes modern theories of epidemiology. Looking at this graphic presented by his study, he showcases how one category builds to the next. He outlines that societal norms and values impact one's social position, then impact these factors here, which all in all impact the distribution of health and well-being. Looking at the LGBTQ+ community, the idea that will be observed the most out of these factors is going to be the idea of social cohesion. As many know, the LGBTQ+ community has faced significant oppression and outcast from society, impacting social cohesion even on an individual level. In a more specific study of social epidemiology for the LGBTQ+ community, researchers from the University of Washington in the School of Social Work conducted a longitudinal study investigating the well-being of 2,415 participants. Through this, they identified a relationship between marginalization and mental illness, proving that there's a positive relationship between identity affirmation and better mental health. In a separate study, these researchers utilized a different survey to analyze. Through analyzing the National Health, Aging, and Sexuality Study with 2,560 participants, they found similar results, highlighting the correlation between social connectedness and better physical health, while social support, employment, and social network size positively impacted physical health. Looking back at all of this research, specifically in the field of epidemiology, something began to stick out at me. I thought about the fact that it's not easy to summarize the LGBTQ+ experience of social cohesion across America, because each state of America is going to yield a different experience. But then I thought about how odd that sounded in my own head. Why would something like geographical factors impact social cohesion? Why are there best and worst states for LGBTQ plus people? Why do more LGBTQ plus people live in one state versus another? Why are there safety rankings? Then I realized this obviously isn't about a geographical or regional component, but rather the way a state governs itself and introduces the idea of structural stigma into their population. I decided to circle back to Michael Marmot's study and saw the idea of political context. I decided to do some deeper diving into this idea, looking at the LGBTQ plus community, seeing how maybe state policies would impact social cultural norms, then someone's social position, then social cohesion, and finally the distribution of health and well-being. This idea especially stared me in the face when Michael stated in his paper that social injustice is killing on a grand scale. So I searched, but nothing showed. And that's when I found I'd arrived at my research gap. Then I began to ask, to what extent do state policies on the LGBTQ plus population impact the self-perceived health of queer adults and contribute to existing health disparities? To answer this question, I decided on a correlational study between numerical ratings of each state and their policies and a health score. A correlational study would essentially give me a yes or no answer, nothing subjective or up to interpretation about it, a black or white. To gather data for a health score, I created a self-rated mental and physical health survey. I decided to go with a survey over focus groups or interviews because a survey would give me the most straightforward option of taking subjective ideas like well-being and turn them into something objective through a Likert scale. Furthermore, a digital survey helped me reach a larger and wider population to better represent the LGBTQ plus community across America. I reached these participants through posting my survey on Facebook groups primarily. Then I also messaged people on Instagram, messaged GSA clubs at universities, and found people through personal connections. I finally decided on a linear regression model and a linear regression t-test to show whether or not health scores were dependent upon state scores. The survey started with information on what the study was for to take informed consent from each of the participants. I included the fact that my survey was completely anonymous, as I wanted to promote comfortability in answering my survey. I wanted to try and eliminate any bias that would come from people who were not fully out yet and feared their identity being exposed. The beginning of the survey had a mandatory question ensuring each of my participants were over the age of 18, not only to avoid issues of parental consent, but also to condense my survey to be specifically for adults. This way, my question would be best answered due to the fact that children do not have to worry about their health on an individual level, as is typically cared for by a parent or guardian. I also provided an exit to each of my questions, providing a prefer not to respond answer choice in case any of my questions proved discomforting or triggering. Each section presented questions that offered 5 quantifiable options, then one answer for prefer not to respond as I aforementioned. On each section, questions like, how often do you spend your time feeling nervous in the mental section, or how often do you protect your skin from sun damage in the physical section were presented. Depending on the question, the answer choices could change. For example, the question, rate your overall physical health, had answer choices ranging from very good to very poor, while the question, how much of your time do you spend feeling depressed, had answer choices ranging from none of the time to all of the time. After I received the responses, I quantified my data using the Likert scale. Going back to my example from before, this is how I use my Likert scale. The question, how much of your time feeling sad or depressed, the answer choice of none of the time would have earned the score of a 1, while the answer all of the time would have earned the score of a 5, meaning the higher the participants scored in these sections, the worse their health was considered. Then, for each participant, I added the scores for the questions in each section, giving them a mental health score, a physical health score, and an overall score, adding the sections together as you could see in the example here. However, there was only one thing left to find, and that was the state score. This was found through the Movement Advancement Project, where they scored each state and their policies on the LGBTQ+ community or LGBTQ+ specific issues. In their method to score states, LGBTQ+ inclusive laws or protective laws would earn points. If the law did not include the LGBTQ+ community, no points would have been awarded. Harmful or discriminatory policies targeted at the community would receive point deductions. If the laws were localized or didn't include the entire state, they would only receive partial points. The maximum overall score for a state was 44.5, while there was no minimum score since states could have received point deductions that could have caused them to go into the negatives. I then added this to my spreadsheet and did a linear regression model to see visually whether or not there would be a negative correlation between state policies and health scores, meaning the better the state scores, the better the health. Then I did a linear regression t-test to see if my results were statistically significant or not. Moving on to the results of my study, I found a slight negative correlation in the overall health, a slight positive correlation in the physical health, and a bit stronger of a negative correlation in the mental health. Looking at these R values, though, it can be seen that this correlation was not very strong. When ran through a linear regression t-test, all of these results proved to be statistically insignificant due to the fact that their p-values were greater than 0.05 or 5%. Let's look back at the research question to remind ourselves of what we were inquiring. To what extent do state policies on the LGBTQ+ community impact the self-perceived health of queer adults and contribute to existing health disparities? With these results, it can be concluded that this study falls to a null hypothesis, showing that there is no correlation between state policies and individual health. Furthermore, state policies do not contribute to existing health disparities. Furthermore, these results are important as they showcase there is something more going on than state policies and structural stigma that is pushing these health disparities. There was one portion of my study that I wanted to draw necessary attention to, and this was the results of the correlational analysis for my mental health scores. Though the p-value was greater than 0.05, it was only 0.14%, or 0.14. Statisticians may argue that this is not completely insignificant. While for this study, this number showcases my results had a likelihood to happen by chance, the size of this number being so close to 0.05 shows that there must be more going on in this aspect, especially considering the limitations of my study. Though typically limitations show holes in the results, my limitations actually further added to my data. First, some people chose the answer of the prefer not to respond answer choice, which caused their results to be struck from my survey. Second, and most importantly, in attempting to reach out to the communities in each state, across every field, I've had major difficulties reaching conservative states. I found that almost every conservative state had limited members in their Facebook groups, and they were all privatized, preventing me from gathering my data. While eventually I was able to gather a large enough sample size to conduct my study properly, it showcased to me that these conservative states were much more exclusive about who they trusted and let into their groups, showing the idea of social cohesion once again. These communities wanted to protect their safe spaces against potential conflict, showing that conflict and non-acceptance of these communities is much more prevalent in these states. This lends itself to further research, maybe potentially looking into resolving the limitations I faced, and looking into the mental aspect once more, as I talked about. Even further than that, future work can look into resolving these disparities, into resolving these limitations. If not from state policies, what is causing these health disparities? With one question answered, many arise. The discussion of LGBTQ+ health is not over and cannot stand to be ignored any longer. And here are the sources I use.
Great, thank you, Alex. So we have a couple of questions for you, and your first question will come from Ms. Walsh-Ahrens.
Good morning, Alex. How did your initial exploration of the scholarly conversation lead to your final research question?
In the beginning of my research, I actually was in a very different direction. Initially, I was actually looking at blue zones and how different cities in the world experience health differently, and how in some cities, people seem to live longer than others. I was looking specifically at Sardinia, Italy, and Okinawa, Japan, as I explored the idea of social epidemiology due to the fact that they found that women empowerment had improved the health of their populations. However, once I found that the scholarly conversation had been mostly explored for blue zones, I decided to take this idea of social epidemiology and apply it to the LGBTQ+ community. Through this, I found that the LGBTQ+ community was facing significant health disparities. Now, in exploring the scholarly conversation for this topic, I came across an article that had actually explored structural stigma and its relationship to LGBTQ+ health. However, this article had actually been redacted. So I wanted to take this idea, transform it in using state policies, and see what avenues it would lead me down.
Excellent.
Excellent. Your next question will come from Ms. Dreyer.
How do your findings provide directions for future research in the field?
As I aforementioned, my p-values for my mental health scores came out to be 0.14, which is very close to 0.05. I encourage future researchers to take this study and possibly improve upon the limitations I faced to see how these p-values would actually be impacted. Furthermore, researchers can take a look into why my limitations exist in the first place. Why are some states more discriminatory than others? This study also fell to a null hypothesis, meaning that the conversation about LGBTQ plus health is not nearly over.
And your final question, if you could revisit your research project, what would you do differently and why?
In my research process, I actually originally planned on taking a mixed method approach where I was going to do a correlational analysis and then also have a focus group to provide a qualitative perspective on my study. However, due to the limitations I faced in reaching conservative states and the time restraints, I faced difficulties in finding enough participants to properly represent the LGBTQ plus community. I decided to cut this section out of my study, but if I could go back, I would definitely try to add this section back in, as I feel like the focus group could have added an important qualitative approach that would have provided a new perspective to the problem and this issue at hand.